This meeting is being recorded.
That was the automated warning. Do you mind if we record you?
Not at all. Go for it.
Great. Thank you. Before we started recording, I went through a little of the background. I didn't mention the confidentiality stuff. Did you get a chance to look over the informed consent document that covers your rights here?
Yep.
Okay, good. So you know we're not going to use anybody's real names. We won't use any company names, product names. It'll all be anonymized. And if you want to stop this at any time, you can just be done with it. You don't have to answer any one question. It's all about you participating however you feel comfortable.
Sounds great.
With that, as we start out, we usually ask you to talk about your own relationship with games, what you do in the industry, or, if we talk to archivists in the field. So, what's your personal relationship with games? Why are we interviewing you?
How far do you want me to go back on that?
Our first archive that we received from a game producer is from the 80s and 90s. You can go back as far as you like, and hopefully it will all be pertinent. I'm sure it will all be pertinent because it's all about game development, and we're interested in the full history.
Sweet. Well, back when I was a little kid, I lived in Southern Florida. Going way, way back. My original interest in games was kind of, because I did live in South Florida for a while and I hated the heat, not a great place to live. So I stayed inside in the air conditioning quite a bit and played Nintendo. And so it was always this like little magical box to me, right? It came from Japan, which was already cool because Transformers also came from Japan. And, I would play the Nintendo games and it always kind of stuck with me. And then like my first actually interaction with the industry, was I grew up in a small ski town in Colorado after that. And, I went to the high school there and I kind of ran out of classes to take there. Didn't know what to do. So I kind of went down to halftime and, went to the community college there, taking more math classes and stuff like that, trying to get a head start. But, as part of that, it kind of soured a few people in the school district because it's a small school district and they get funding per school, student in there. And since I dropped down to halftime, they lost funding for it. So they're like, hey, as part of this, can you just proctor an independent study or something with another guy? And I was always interested in game development with it. So I helped another guy, Evan, and we kind of sat down, we commandeered some computer equipment and they had a T1 line, which was awesome because everybody else was on dial-up in the ski town. So we made a little Half-Life mod. We wrote to Valve and said, hey, can we get your Uber SDK that they released? And so we signed a NDA for it. They sent us a thing. We started making a little video game mod called Sicaria, which was basically just us learning how to make games. So it wasn't much more than we made some levels. We did photo ref and made textures out of it. I learned to kind of program with it. And then I went to college in the first summer. Evan had applied to work at America's Army, which was the U.S. government's first-person shooter that they put out. So he went there. After he graduated, he was a year behind me. So during that first summer of college, he's like, hey, you want to come out and do an internship, work as QA or just, do whatever it needs to do because they were shipping America's Army version 1.0. On July 4th, unironically, I guess. So I went out there and lived on his couch for 2 or 3 weeks or something, like that. And, to me, game development wasn't ever something that I thought was attainable. I saw it in magazines and stuff like that. So for me, it was my basketball. No kid really expects to ever be a pro basketball player, but, the dream was there. So I was just super psyched to have any kind of relationship, with games at all. So that was kind of my first step. But a lot of the people that I worked with at that time at America's Army later went on to form a company called Scion, which was a division of Epic, or I forgot what the exact relationship was. It was a sister company to Epic Games. And they made, I think, Unreal Championship and one other game. And they started on something like Gears of War. And then Epic just decided to hey, let's just absorb you guys. And so a lot of those people from Scion became core members of Epic. So Mike Capps, who was later the president of Epic, Jim Brown, who I think you're going to interview or have already interviewed, at some point. All those guys were from America's Army and then later at Epic. So, I after that, it was like a summer internship, and then I went and I graduated. And Evan called me up again. He's like, "Hey, we're doing America's Army 2.7. Do you want a job?" And I'm like, "Yeah, sure." So I applied for it and went and worked on America's Army 2.7, 2.8, and then we did a reboot, America's Army 3.0, which was using Unreal Engine 3. So we got new technology and made a new game on top of it. And so I was kind of working on the engine and the systems and kind of the core gameplay. It was my first job out of college. Because it was the Army, it was a lot of first people's jobs out of college because they honestly didn't pay a whole lot. A lot of people had, kind of quandaries with working as contractors for the Army and stuff. It was always this weird, people were either super into it or super opposed to it. I just thought it was cool that I could actually make video games. So I just dove all into it. So I worked there for about 3.5 years, and then through a very long, involved story, they ended up laying everybody off the day after America's Army 3 shipped. So I got a call from my boss. I was about to take a vacation for first time I'd taken a vacation after 2.5 years of crunching. I was on the jet bridge on my way to Japan with my wife because we had never taken it. I got married. I graduated, got married, and went to work at America's Army all within 2 weeks. So we never gotten to take a vacation or anything. So after this is all done, let's go to Japan and have fun. And I got the news that I was laid off on the jet bridge there. So I had a 10-hour flight from San Francisco to Tokyo to stew about being laid off after killing ourselves on the project.
Wow.
Yeah. So when I came back, I honestly, I didn't think I would ever work in the video game industry again because it felt like such a fluke that I had that opportunity. But then I applied at Epic, and because people had kind of known me, that were absorbed into Epic, I got an interview and I ended up working here. So I worked at Epic Games in North Carolina at the headquarters, for 3.5 years. Kind of going through a bunch of different roles. My first one was a gameplay programmer. So I would basically sit with the designers and level designers, and they would prototype, boss battles or mechanics for a game that never actually got released. And then my job was to kind of take the prototypes that they made in this visual scripting thing called Kismet, which they abused way above its intended function to do the gameplay stuff. But it was cool because you had this kind of tactile prototype. I would take that and transform it into code and add kind of my little design spin on it, and then they would take it and then modify it a little bit, and we would kind of ping pong it back and forth, and we would find the fun in the gameplay. So I did that for a little bit. Then I got put on UI for Gears of War 3 because we had licensed Scaleform, which was a UI middleware. Unreal had licensed it, and as part of that, they needed somebody to go and rewrite all the Gears of War 3 UI in Scaleform. So I ended up getting put on that. That was fortuitous for other reasons I'll get into a little bit later. But after that, they said, "What do you want to do?" And I said, "I really like that kind of ping-pong back and forth with the designer where we each kind of have our spin on it, me from kind of a technical side and them from kind of the design side. I'd really like to work on visual programming that kind of brings that gap together a little bit more, because they were using a tool set that wasn't really intended to do it, but it turned out that they could make it do lots of cool stuff above and beyond its intended uses. So I worked on a system called Blueprints, which is our visual programming language in UE4, and the intent behind that was to let people that weren't programmers actually program stuff that would traditionally require a programmer. So I worked on that for a little bit, and then that kind of gained a lot more traction than I expected it to, and I had to hire up a team. And at the same time, the people that I had worked with at Scaleform, the UI solution for Gears of War, were the people that went on to Gaikai and then later to found Oculus. So Nate Mitchell, Brendan Areve, a bunch of those guys, and they're like, "Hey, we've got this cool little device." So they brought one over that was all duct taped together and stuff like that. "We don't have any content. Do you want to hook something up to it?" So I said, "Yeah, sure." So I asked Tim, our CEO, if I could do it after hours, just kind of see what we could do with it. And he said, "Sure, go ahead for it." So we started making these little demos for it. Me and Nick Donaldson, who was one of the designers that was one of our first power users on Blueprints. I walked into his room one time and he had made a Rubik's Cube solver. He's a designer. He has no technical background, but he had made a Rubik's Cube solver out of the Blueprint stuff. So I'm just like, holy shit, this guy has some talent. So we ended up kind of being joined at the hip. He was one of my kind of power users that throw stuff over the edge and get feedback. And but he later on went on to work with me on all these VR demos. So we made one called Showdown, and then we made one called Bullet Train, then we made a game called Robo Recall. So that was kind of the next phase of my career, was doing that. And now I'm I'm a technical director and studio head at EGS. I moved out of North Carolina after 3.5 years because my wife and our family's from the West Coast.